Oh, sorry, folks. Yeah, I was waiting for the video to start, and here I was. Yeah, so good, folks. Good to see you all here. I'm on the road still, and just getting my tea all brewed up. Now, folks, a few stories to go into tonight. We're going to talk about first how the Chinese Communist Party has been discussing, actually behind closed doors, how to weaponize the pandemic. Now, you might have actually seen Epoch Times. We've been talking about this for a while now. Actually, last year we had some articles on it. There's some new reports coming out now demonstrating this. Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping talking about it. I'll be going into in just a bit. Also, folks, Epoch Times reporter has been attacked in Hong Kong. This follows just on the heels of 4 individuals going into our facilities and destroying our printing press with baseball bats. I'll be going into this, a few other stories, anti-rioting bill in North Carolina, a few others. And folks, as always, wonderful seeing you all. Yeah, Debbie Serberg, yeah, defund the FBI. Nilda Whitty, hola as well. Maria Pyle, how you doing? Good to see you. Linda Manning, yeah, thank you. Good folks, good seeing you all here. Now, let's jump into the first stories for the night. And as always, folks, if you have questions, please leave them in the chat. We'll try to get to them. Now, first of all, let's talk about what the Chinese Communist Party is up to. So, Epoch Times reports here. Xi Jinping talks chaos. Pandemic provides favorable situation to CCP. It says here, Epoch Times reports, Chinese leader Xi Jinping claimed the main character of the present world is a chaos that has been unseen in the past 100 years. And the current timing and circumstances in the world all favor China and can help the Chinese Communist Party to reach its goal, to dominate the world. And this sounds intense, right? China wanting to dominate the world. They talk about it openly. The Chinese Communist Party has been stating this goal for at least 50 years. They've been stating this to some extent since they started the Chinese Communist Party about 100 years ago, around 1921. And with their 100-year anniversary coming up, they're viewing this in that light. This has been a goal of the CCP from the beginning. Now, it continues here. Xi explained, this is Xi Jinping, the head of the Chinese Communist Party. Xi explained that the chaos was created by the COVID-19 pandemic. Xi didn't say clearly how China has the favorable situation, but he delivered the message that China has curbed the outbreak successfully while the majority of countries in the world have been damaged and are suffering badly from the pandemic. Now, arguable, if we go back in time, let's look at what happened with the pandemic in China. Remember, folks, the pandemic was the biggest topic in China. The Chinese Communist Party was reeling from it, biggest story in the country. Then what happens? Then they do an economic assessment, and they find that the lockdowns are basically going to cripple their economy. And so from the release of that one study showing their businesses were about to die, their economy was about to die, overnight, the Chinese Communist Party declares all of a sudden the pandemic is over, time to open up, everything's fine. And meanwhile, they were still canceling some of the Chinese Communist Party's top leadership meetings. And so they did not end the virus any better than anywhere else in the world did. Arguably, probably a lot worse, because the Sinovac vaccine studies show, based on the data coming out from it, the death tolls tend to go up rather than down when they start using them, it seems. One of the phenomena that takes place with the Chinese vaccine. But they're promoting the Chinese Communist Party model of dealing with the virus as being the successful model, the China model. And many Western news outlets, many Western academics that follow the China line, follow the party line with the Chinese Communist Party, have been repeating this lie. And so this is the kind of background of what's happening with that, right? Now, he reasoned that this is why China holds a favorable situation. He said this is Xi Jinping. He said, in response to the global pandemic of the novel coronavirus, it shows immediately which country's leadership and political system is good. And it continues a bit into it. It says, this is the first time that Xi made his self-confidence public, which echoed recent words from other Chinese officials. Now, Chinese officials are proud the pandemic started in China, but left China. And so they're not trying to say it didn't start in China now. They're trying to say it started here, it left here. And so, they keep pivoting on the narrative. Remember, first, folks, The narrative, even from the CCP, the virus came from Wuhan. Even the Chinese Communist Party was referring to it as the Wuhan coronavirus. Then they started framing that as racist. Then they started saying, no, it came from America. It came from the rest of the world. And they got all the clown media here to say that it was racist to say it came from China, right, from Wuhan. Now, after they started playing that up, they started manipulating the data, saying you can't even say it came from China. Now the Chinese Communist Party is saying, yes, it started in China. It came from here, but we beat it first. And so they keep playing with the narrative. That's where the narrative's at currently. Now, going into this just a bit more, right? Now, another Chinese Communist Party official, Chen Yixin, the Secretary General of the Chinese Central Political and Legal Committee, told staff members of the committee in Beijing on January 10th, going back a bit, he said, quote, in today's world, China's good order is in sharp contrast with the West's turmoil. And this is significant, right? He says, socialism with Chinese characteristics has an unprecedented vitality. They say the East is rising and the West is in decline. Now, this is another quote. This is from He Bin, the CCP boss of Qiliang County in northwestern China's Qinghai province, quoting Xi, the East is rising and the West is declining. This is the kind of wording going around in China right now. This is how they're viewing what's happening in the world right now. This is how they're viewing the United States versus the Chinese Communist Party right now. The East is rising and the West is declining. And again, this is from the other official, right? From Chen Yixin. They're saying again, in today's world, China's good order is in sharp contrast with the West's turmoil. Now, the Chinese Communist Party is trying to sell its China model, what they call the China model, or socialism with Chinese characteristics. This is the Chinese Communist Party's system of totalitarian government. This is the system of, say, social credit systems, where they can monitor every single thing you say on the internet, every single thing you do, every single purchase you make, every single person you're friends with, and they give you a citizen score based on all of that. And they use that to determine your freedom or your oppression in that society. This is the regime that if you violate its ideas, if you become a prisoner of conscience, you could have your organs forcefully removed to, go to a wealthy party cadre who's willing to pay the money for it. That is socialism with Chinese characteristics, right? This is the model that they're promoting around the world. They're saying the West is chaotic. They say, look at the riots happening in America. Look at the chaos in the rest of the world. The Chinese Communist Party is able to brutally establish order. This is the model of governance they're promoting around the world right now. And this is also how they're viewing the pandemic. They're viewing this pandemic as something valuable to the Chinese Communist Party. They see it as something that is benefiting the Chinese Communist Party. And let's go back a bit. You might have seen some of the recent reports as well, right? Where you had recently released, actually, other media have been reporting it a couple of years back, when the pandemic started, there was a Chinese military leader who sent a letter allegedly to Xi Jinping telling him that the virus can be used strategically by the Chinese Communist Party, that they can weaponize the virus, that they can use this for their own advantage. And going back to last year, again, Epoch Times also reported, actually an article from Trevor Loudon at the time, one of the top experts on communism, that the Chinese Communist Party had also sent an alert out to every communist leadership in the world, not just people in power, but even groups like the Communist Party USA, right? Sent alerts out to them all, telling them to use the virus to their advantage, to use this strategically, to use this opportune time to advance the interests of the Chinese Communist Party. And this is where they're heading with it. This is what they're doing with it. This is how they're using it. Now, folks, on that note, we've, of course, been trying to get the news out on this while facing quite a few attacks ourselves. I mentioned that one of our reporters was just attacked in Hong Kong. And I'll be going into that in just a bit. But first, of course, we're totally demonetized on YouTube. Luckily, we have some supporters here. We have some, all you folks are great, of course. And we do have Epoch TV now. But we also have sponsors. And tonight's episode is brought to you by American Hartford Gold. With all the turbulence of the economy, like $6 trillion in spending, talks of inflation, and, rising oil prices as we start to feel the weight of all this unnecessary spending and of, again, this pipeline cyber attacks, the unpredictability happening right now. Right, with all this happening right now, you can consider investing in an asset that's often stable and that's typically on the incline. That's gold and silver. Now, American Hartford Gold is one of the highest rated firms in the country with an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau. They can have your gold and silver delivered right to your doorstep or into your IRA. To learn more, please check out the link in the description below, where American Hartford Gold is providing a free 25-page information guide. And if you call them now, you can get up to $1,500 of free silver on all qualifying first orders. The number for that is 877-260-2764. You can also text Joshua to 65532. And so, folks, a big thanks out to them. And let's go to a few other stories for the night, and then we'll go into some questions. And so, folks, again, if you have questions, please leave them in the chat. We'll try to get to them. And the drink tonight, by the way, is a black tea I traveled with. Yeah, on the road again right now. Now, folks, you might remember the story just recently. Well, we had a video of it, in fact, where 4 individuals in Hong Kong broke into our Hong Kong facility, our printing press of the Epoch Times, and destroyed our printing press using baseball bats. They threatened the staff there, destroyed our printing press. We've gotten things back up and running. Now, a very similar attack has happened on one of our own staff, again using baseball bats. It was a woman, one of our reporters in Hong Kong, who was beaten up by what we believe was a Chinese Communist Party thug. And again, this staff member had been seen this individual a couple times, had this baseball bat on him both times. This time he assaulted her. Let's go into what's happening right now. Epoch Times reports this. They say Epoch Times calls for international condemnation of attack on its reporter in Hong Kong. And just briefly on this, Epoch Times is blacklisted in mainland China. We cannot go to mainland China. But we do have offices in both Taiwan and in Hong Kong. And the Chinese language edition of the Epoch Times is actually one of the main voices of freedom for Chinese people, not just in China, but around the world. Really, we're probably the only large, in terms of scale, Chinese language media outlet that's not controlled or influenced by the Chinese Communist Party. And so we're able to get a lot of news. The Chinese Communist Party really, really doesn't want to be made public, especially when it comes to educating the Chinese people, including in Hong Kong. The Chinese Communist Party typically views us as, public enemy number one. Now, since the CCP forcefully ended autonomy in Hong Kong, they've been getting a lot more, let's say, brazen with their attacks, including their attempts, for example, to silence any voices that they do not control. And with this, we've seen a lot of attacks on the Epoch Times been happening recently. Now, Epoch Times reports this. It says, Epoch Times calls upon the international community to condemn the Chinese Communist Party's attempts to silence the Epoch Times and end press freedom in Hong Kong. The ongoing campaign against the Hong Kong Epoch Times took a dangerous new turn on the morning of May 11th as a thug attacked reporter Sarah Leong with a softball bat outside her apartment building. Leong suffered bruises to both legs and was taken to Queen Elizabeth Hospital for evaluation. Now, the attack follows an attempt to shut down the Epoch Times' printing press, as well as previous attempts to intimidate Leong, this reporter who was just attacked. Now, in the April 12th attack on the printing press, intruders smashed equipment with sledgehammers, poured concrete debris over sensitive machinery, and stole a computer. The press was out of operation for a few days. That was the 5th attack that has happened more than once. That was the 5th attack on the printing press since it opened in 2004, with the previous one being an attempt to set it on fire in November 2019. You might have seen in 2019 again, I believe it was 4 or 5 individuals forced their way into our printing press, poured flammable liquid on our machinery, and set it on fire. Now, Leong, this woman who was just attacked, reported that an unknown man harassed her at her home on April 24th and that she was followed by an unknown man on April 26th. Now, June Guo, the director of the Hong Kong Epoch Times, said that the Chinese Communist Party is making use of the underworld to attack the Epoch Times, which, is a bit of background, is not unusual for the Chinese Communist Party to do. They typically use the Chinese Mafia, right? What they call them the triads. They typically call the Chinese Mafia to work as their, say, strong arm for these Chinese communities. They don't just do it in Hong Kong. They also do it in Taiwan. They also do it in New York. They also do it in other parts of the U.S. Anywhere you have a large Chinese community, you typically have the Chinese Mafia operating to some extent. And you have the Chinese Communist Party working oftentimes with elements of the Chinese Mafia. In New York, for example, there's the Fuqing Gang, F-U-K-C-H-I-N-G gang. That organization tended to operate under the Fujian American Association, which is one of the closest leaning Communist Party organizations. In Taiwan, for example, you have a man named Chang An-lo. They call him the White Wolf, who does the same exact thing. In Hong Kong, you have what are called the White Shirts. And again, all these are basically Chinese Mafia working at the behest of the Chinese Communist Party, carrying out the orders of the Chinese Communist Party. And oftentimes, folks, it's things like this: intimidation tactics, things meant to attack Chinese people, things meant to keep them quiet. In fact, in my investigations in New York City, I had a woman tell me one time, and I was researching these organizations, tell me that they had told her they could make her disappear, right? This is the kind of intimidation happening on foreign soil, the kind of intimidation happening on Hong Kong soil. And this is how the Chinese Communist Party is trying to use these strong arms, the Chinese Mafia, in order to silence voices it does not want being heard. Now, the Epoch Times, the actions against the Epoch Times are part of an ongoing campaign of intimidation, violent attacks, illegal arrests, and stigmatization by CCP officials and in CCP-controlled media. They're using everything they can to attack us. Again, against the free press as well in Hong Kong. The CCP seeks to intimidate journalists and citizens, making honest reporting more difficult to do in Hong Kong. And, folks, to also force the press to abandon their work. That said, we're not going to be backing down, let's be clear. But for 20 years, Liang's program, the woman who was attacked, her program is called Cherished Words, True Words. It has attracted a loyal audience that respects her truthful reporting. The attack on her in broad daylight, just outside her home, is a vivid example of how the free and peaceful environment of Hong Kong has deteriorated and how any individual's personal freedom is now at risk. The attack also highlights how the CCP fears a free press and fears the Epoch Times' truthful reporting. The Epoch Times solemnly declares, right, that it will not back down and will continue to report truthfully and to serve the best interests of Hong Kong. We're not going to let this stop us, folks. The Epoch Times calls on press freedom and human rights organizations, free governments, and free people everywhere to rally to defend press freedom in Hong Kong. The fight for press freedom there is the world's fight, as the CCP seeks to impose its tyranny first in Hong Kong and then more broadly. And folks, we just talked about how the Chinese Communist Party is viewing again the situation in the world, right? The Chinese Communist Party is looking to spread its system of dominance around the world. It's looking to spread its China model around the world. And what does that look like, folks? That looks like things like this. That looks like things where if a voice goes against the powers that be, people working on behalf of the government can go and beat them with baseball bats. If anyone challenges the narratives being put forward by the ruling regime, they can be targeted. If a media organization tries to stand up against them, their printing presses can be smashed with sledgehammers. And again, folks, I just talked to a great guy today, Casey Fleming. He's with a private security company called Black Ops Partners. Great feature coming up soon. He made a point, folks, that look, you can look at that. You can look at what the world will be like if the Chinese Communist Party succeeds by looking at how they treat the dissidents within their own borders. You can look at how the Chinese Communist Party treats Muslim Uyghurs, slave camps, harsh monitoring, 24/7 surveillance, women being forced to have Communist Party cadres live in their homes when their husbands are taken away to prison camps, right? You can look at how they harvest the organs from people while they're still alive, often without painkillers, simply because they want to practice Falun Gong and try to be better people. You can look at them trying to do cultural genocide against individuals like Mongolians and against Tibetans. What they are doing to their own people, and look at Christians, and what they're doing to Christians. What they're doing to their own people will be the model the Chinese Communist Party tries to spread around the world if it's able to spread its China model. And frankly, folks, what's happening in Hong Kong right now is where the front line of all this is, right? And again, folks, the Epoch Times is solemnly declaring right now that we will not be silenced by these attacks. We will not fold by these attacks. We will not give in to this. And again, calling for everybody to rally behind press freedom. The fight for press freedom there is the world's fight, as the Epoch Times says. As the CCP seeks to impose its tyranny first in Hong Kong and then more broadly, as freedom anywhere is a rebuke to its dictatorial rule. Since the attack, the Epoch Times in Hong Kong has received an outpouring of support from Hong Kongers. They have seen the Epoch Times as a symbol of freedom and hope for Hong Kong. And we thank them all for their support. And folks, again, this is the reality of trying to stand up to the CCP. This is the reality of exposing the CCP. I mentioned previously that even in New York City, where I was exposing some of these organizations under the United Front Work Department, one of the Chinese Communist Party's main branches, for exporting its surveillance, its persecution, and its subversion of government officials, journalists, academics, and others overseas. During that time, folks, they were threatening even me on U.S. soil. I mentioned this a few times. And so, again, the front line of this is in Hong Kong right now. And we're not going to be backing down from this. We're going to keep doing what we're doing, keep reporting the truth. But we do see them getting more brazen on this. And we do hope the world community, whether it be governments, whether it be media organizations or nonprofits, and again, folks, even you can all help us spread the word on this. We hope the world gets behind us and standing up against this. Now, in other news, we have here in the U.S. some other big shifts taking place. North Carolina, let's go to what's happening there with this anti-rioting bill. Oh yeah, Marco Polo drink tonight is a Newman black tea. It's quite nice. All right, folks. Let's go to what's happening in North Carolina. Epoch Times reports North Carolina House passes a GOP-backed anti-rioting bill. And this is significant because we've gone on this a few times now. What is happening state by state in the U.S. is what is spreading across the U.S. What is happening state by state to push back against what they view as government tyranny, what they view as government overreach, what they view as things meant to take away their constitutional rights or other things, are being challenged. And as states have begun to push back against it, we see other states replicating their policies. This is the next big thing happening right now. Right? Let's go into what's happening. Epoch Times reports the North Carolina State House approved a GOP-backed bill, Republican-backed bill, that enhances penalties for rioting and civil disorder, coming in the wake of nationwide Black Lives Matter-linked riots and demonstrations last year. Now, the bill, House Bill 805, would allow property owners to sue for damages incurred during a riot, including court and attorney fees. And it also seeks to significantly increase penalties for participating in a riot, inciting a riot that leads to death, and engaging in a riot that leads to injuries of a first responder, according to the text of the bill. Now, it continues a bit further into this, stating, just to clarify, it says, quote, the term protest is not included in the bill and only applies to riots, which are defined by a public disturbance involving at least 3 people who are engaged in disorderly or violent conduct that results in injury or damage. Under the measure, individuals who incite or call on others to partake in a riot may face the state's most serious misdemeanor charge. Misdemeanor still, just being clear. Up to 150 days in jail and a fine. However, if the damage exceeds $1,500, it would be increased to a felony. Now, a few different issues you're going to have with this, just to be clear, right? In America, under the Constitution, we have the right to assemble. We have freedom of assembly. You have the right to protest. And, of course, we have as well, on both sides of the spectrum now, we've had the Black Lives Matter protests and riots. which have led to many, many deaths across the United States, the burning down of many communities, even Black communities, and other issues like this. Autonomous zones like they had in Seattle, autonomous zones like they had in Portland, and also the joining into this of anarcho-communist organizations like Antifa that are pushing again for really forceful overthrow of the government, and seem to actually be going against the Biden administration now as well as they were against the Trump administration. That's one side of it. The other side of it is how the narrative of the January 6th protest, which led to individuals doing basically a walkthrough of the Capitol building, when after Capitol Police opened up the barriers and basically, well, literally waved people into the building. You had that as well, right? There was a lot of fake news around it. You might have heard the story about the Capitol Police officer who was killed by Trump supporters. That turned out to have been a lie. The individual was not attacked by them, not killed by them, wasn't even sprayed with pepper spray as had been alleged. The story was fake. But one individual was killed. That was Ashley Babbitt, shot in the neck by a Capitol Police officer. But the narrative of that is being used on the same grounds, right? They're trying to say that Trump incited a riot, that Trump incited violence, that Trump, they say, encouraged people to break into the Capitol building and basically commit an act of, insurrection, I think they're calling it, right? And so with this new push right now, it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds. If North Carolina begins increasing the charges against individuals who are participating in a riot, including being able to go after people who they say incite riots, which is already kind of illegal in the U.S. anyways, we could see Democrats get behind it. We'll have to see, because this actually fits within the boundaries of their narratives, just as with the Republicans. Now, this is being done by Republicans currently, specifically about the BLM, Black Lives Matter riots that are still going on in the country. And again, as you have individuals, BLM/Antifa rioters, pulling people out of their cars, beating them, as you had happening last year, and more recently, holding people up with firearms, getting them out of their cars and so on, as we've seen just recently. We'll have to see what happens with this. This is not really increasing the penalty that much. This is, again, making it just kind of a serious misdemeanor, up to 150 days in jail, and maybe a fine. If the damage they cause goes over $1,500, they might face a felony. And so we'll have to see how it goes. One important question is, though, typically after you see socialist systems take power, they tend to not mind when the, let's say, violent radicals who help get them into power are thrown in prison or are tossed out. Because typically the people who help bring them into power through, riots, through burning down of cities, through violence, tend to be seen as threats against the new power. Now, with that said, of course, a lot of the BLM protesters and Antifa protesters or rioters helped get the Democrat Party into power right now. It'll be interesting to see whether they choose to go after them now that they're the ones in power, and now that BLM and Antifa are really kind of turning against them as well. Also, what does it mean watching some of these autonomous type zones get started up again? They've been trying to do this in Portland again. We saw this happen in Seattle last year. We'll have to see what happens. And we'll also have to see how this goes as, again, Trump, having his new office of the 45th president, right? As Trump begins pushing for his new agenda. He's going to be pushing to, again, back up candidates going into 2022. He's going to be doing things like grassroots organizing, community organizing. He's also talking about protests. There's also been talked about protest. And so we'll have to see if this is applied against Trump protests as well. Now, folks, again, we'll have to see what happens with it. A lot going on right now. But at the very least, we can see at least Republicans getting behind bills like this, especially if it is, against individuals who cause damage in riots. The biggest thing here is really the allowing of business owners to sue, including not just, again, the individuals, but also, suing for court and attorney fees, allowing them the ability to sue. This could actually have a big impact on preventing these things going forward. We'll have to see how it goes, and folks, I'll keep you all updated on this. Now, that said, folks, let's go into some questions for the night. But first, I want to show you all, we've been talking for a while now about Epoch TV, EPOCH TV.com. Again, our new uncensored channel, which you can support, again, with a monthly subscription, $4.99 a month, where you'll get Crossroads, you get all of our interviews, you get the special features we're working on. You also get a lot of our other shows we put together, some great content there, epochtv.com, EPOCH TV.com. And folks, I'll show you a quick trailer right now with some of the stuff we're working on over there.
The founders were concerned that those in power would have the ability to shut down newspapers, shut down speech, shut down freedom of worship. Now the question is, who is in power now? Well, obviously the federal government is still a very powerful political machine and always has been. But they have a new technique now of using as a handmaiden private corporate monopolies that control the channels of information to help shut down the speech and the viewpoints that certain people in power in the federal government don't like. And that's a very, very dangerous trend. If you're a media information company and you are a monopoly and use it to harm the dissemination and diversity of opinion, then you're harming free speech just as much as if the government were doing it.
Yeah, so again, folks, we have some great interviews going up there. Most of our interviews are there now. If you want to specifically support Crossroads through Epoch TV, go to epochtv.com/Crossroads. So if you want to really support Crossroads specifically through Epoch TV, again, that's Epoch TV, EPOCH TV.com/Crossroads. You can let them know that Crossroads sent you. We really appreciate the support on that, folks. All right, let's jump into some questions for the night. And again, if you have questions, please leave them in the chat now. I'll try to get to them. Yeah, so a lot to talk about too. Actually, after the questions, I want to go into what's happening right now in New Hampshire, where you have another election audit now starting. Remember, there's the Arizona audit taking place right now. New Hampshire is about to have its own audit. So, folks, stick around for that. Let's go over some questions first on this. Now, let's see here. This is from Stampede Buffalo. You said, who/what is protecting the CCP here in the States? Yeah, that's a good question, because the Chinese Communist Party acts with a lot of impunity here in the United States. It was really only under Trump, and again, you know, like him or don't like him, right? Your choice, but it was really only under Trump that we started seeing a lot of the individuals wrapped up with the United Front begin to get targeted. Remember what happened, folks, when you started seeing individuals like the head of the chemistry department at Harvard University start to face charges after it was found that, again, he was working under the 1,000 Talents program, one of the Chinese Communist Party's program to control Western academics. How many different universities were called out for taking money from the Chinese Communist Party? How many different researchers were found to have been spying for the Chinese Communist Party? We started seeing a lot of this stuff happening under Trump, right? People who are working on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party facing criminal charges for their actions. Now, we didn't really see much of that before. You saw some cases here and there. It wasn't that much. Now, when it comes to the Chinese Communist Party, they do this on a very, very, very large scale. And I would say that even what Trump was doing was just a drop in a bucket compared to the size of what's happening. Let's go over how the Chinese Communist Party basically runs the West, how they run foreign countries. I talked about the United Front Work Department. This is a branch of the Chinese Communist Party, a branch of their government that works full-time as their job subverting foreign societies, inviting public officials, business leaders, journalists, and so on trips back to China, where they sell the whole China narrative to them, give them different interests. Like, for example, right? You might leave the country with a business deal. One of your family members might leave the country with a business deal. Maybe you'll get sold on some kind of, honey trap where you'll, wake up and find yourself in a compromising situation with a young girl, for example. They do many things like this. Typically, Chinese espionage works on what they consider to be human moral problems, typically lust, right? Honey traps, greed, business interest, power, helping you get into political power, or helping you rise through the ranks within a company. Or it can even be things like fame. If you're an academic and you feel no one's ever paid attention to you before, and then suddenly you get invited to China and they're rolling out the red carpet for you and making you feel like you're the king of the world, right? You have all these students asking smart questions to you, and you think, finally, someone recognizes my genius. These are the things they exploit. And so they invite to China, they work with, here on US soil, academics, heads of think tanks, business leaders, anyone who is of influence in foreign society. They will try to subvert, get influence over, and control over through the United Front. They have a few other branches that go along these similar things. They have, for example, the 1,000 Talents program. Similar movement, pretty much part of the same thing, meant to basically recruit Westerners in order to get them to serve in place or to go back to China to serve the interests of the CCP. They have the Torch program, they have the 973 program, they have the 211 program, pretty much different names for the same basic operations. But the important part is this. For many Chinese agents, and this is a very large operation, this is a full-time job. They do this as a full-time job. And folks, if you were to look at the full extent of this, right, tied into what they call unrestricted warfare, business warfare, war on business, economic warfare, like stuff that affects the GDP, culture warfare, like the subversion of Hollywood, media warfare, like the control of mainstream news outlets, you name it, the control of social media, right? All these things, drug warfare, how they're fueling the fentanyl crisis in the United States, how they're supplying drug cartels with precursor chemicals for drugs like methamphetamine. All these things, there's a huge list of strategies like this, are tied into this exact same system. And so this is the system they're using to do this, the system they're using to subvert this country. And if you're asking what is protecting the CCP here in the United States, if you were to ask me, I'd say it's probably individuals within our government, within our legal departments, within our society, within media organizations, within think tanks who are working on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party or have been compromised by the Chinese Communist Party, who are defending these interests and preventing them from being resolved. Typically, that's the way it works. Next question here is from Soul Flame. He said, do you think the CCP regime will become the next regime taking over the world? I mean, other countries, including Western countries, being structured like communists are. Well, they're definitely going to try to do it. The way the CCP will do it, if they move forward with this, maybe by 2049, when they believe the Chinese military is, where it needs to be, maybe then they will try to, do things like launch military attacks and so on. It's possible. But until then, the main vehicle they're going to have, right, are pretty much what I just described, these systems of subversion, overt espionage, things happening right in front of your eyes. You can watch it happening clear as day. You can see it happening, right? You can watch it happening. But again, it doesn't typically violate the law in some regards, and they're able to gain control of the institutions, gain control of the elite of foreign societies, and use those to drive the interests of the CCP, again, over those societies. That's one side of it, right? One side of it. On the other side of it is their plan to do things like under the One Belt, One Road initiative, where they're going into countries and they're getting countries basically controlled, right? Making them essentially vassal states by getting them into debt traps, using debt slavery to basically, gain control of their institutions, gain control of critical infrastructure, gain control of natural resources. They gain control over the things that make the country basically function. Through these methods, the CCP can gain control of foreign societies. Now, if we were to step back, because I talked briefly, right? I talked briefly about unrestricted warfare, which is the doctrine, the term they would use for this full spectrum, unconventional type war. The thinking is actually very simple, and it's this. If you were to conquer a country, what would you want to get out of it, right? What would you want to achieve? What does it mean to have conquered a country? You control their politics, you control their economy, you gain, some benefit. Maybe you can tax them, maybe you can siphon money out of them. You can get something out of them, right? You control the media, you control the culture. That's what conquering a country is. The Chinese Communist Party, through unrestricted warfare, looked at that and said, how do we achieve those exact same things without doing something that would constitute traditional warfare? Tanks, bombs, guns, and so on, right? Because they assessed that they could not win an open war with the United States. They can't do it. And so what they did instead is they weaponized every single institution in the country against other countries. Foreign investment becomes a weapon. Hollywood, media becomes a weapon. Psychological warfare becomes a weapon, controlling the psyche of countries. Getting, for example, their natural resources. You control the resources. Getting their factories. You control their productive facilities. You control the means of production. Gaining control of their politicians. You control their politics, right? If you control all these things, you control the country. That is the basis of the Chinese Communist Party's system of unconventional warfare, meant to institute in foreign countries the China model. And they're already very far along with this in a lot of Africa, a lot of Latin America, a lot of Asia. They're doing a lot of right now to subvert Western countries as well. New Zealand, deeply subverted. Australia, heavily subverted, although the locals there are pushing back against it. Canada, deeply subverted, although the locals there are pushing back against it. Much of Europe, many parts deeply subverted. The United States also deeply subverted. But you still have people pushing back against it. You still have people exposing it. This is how the CCP is doing these things. And so war with the CCP, at least for now, this is how it manifests. This is the form it takes. And they call it war. In their own words, they call it war. And in their own statements, public statements, not even trying to hide it, they refer to this as war. In their eyes, in their definitions, and in their organizing, they are waging full-scale war on most of the world. And again, they're actually pretty far along with it in a lot of places. Next question's from L.A. Rose. You said, good evening, Joshua. Can you please elaborate on this supposed cyber attack on our gasoline pipeline? Is there any relatable evidence as to what actually happened? Thank you. So this U.S. gas pipeline was hit by a cyber attack, and it's apparently causing soaring gas prices or gas shortages in many parts of the U.S. right now. I've seen some photographs, videos of the long lines leading into gas stations. I have to see what comes out from this. They're blaming this cyber attack on a group of Russian hackers. And there was even a public letter issued by this, kind of shadowy hacker organization claiming responsibility, not directly for the attack, but suggesting they carried it out. Now, if you were to see things how I see them, it's a bit more complicated than that. Now, as a bit of background on this, I was actually the tech editor at Epoch Times for several years, and one of my main beats alongside Chinese espionage and so on was actually cybersecurity for a long time. And so going back to the Chinese Communist Party cyber attack against Google, Operation Aurora back in 2010, the rise of hacktivist organizations like Anonymous and LulzSec and things like this, cybersecurity became kind of a mainstream issue. Now, here's the problem you have when you have countries or organizations trying to pin a cyber attack on a specific, what they call threat actor. This is typically how companies do this, and how cybersecurity companies try to define it, right? And this is also why, and I'll explain to you why this is significant, because it points to the fact that they don't really know who did it. Even though they claim they know who did it, they don't really know who did it. Let me go into it. Typically, the way that these organizations define, let's say, a threat actor, China being a threat actor, the Chinese Communist Party's Unit 61398, the military hackers who were indicted under Obama, whether it was them, whether it was, Fuzzy Bear, I think they called it, the Russian hacker group they claimed that breached the DNC servers, whatever they want to name it, right? Typically, the way that companies will identify or try to say that a cyber attack came from a certain group or a certain country, as you look at things like, for example, the keyboard they use. Did they use a Russian keyboard? Did they use a Chinese keyboard? Did they use tools that are common for, let's say, certain groups? Certain groups use certain hacking tools, certain methodologies that relate, again, to certain countries' interests. And so they'll look at what the interest, national interest, business interest, or let's say criminal mischief interest of whatever organization it might be. If it's an organization that they say is in the interest of Russia, they'll say that these tools, right, this modus operandi, these modes of operation, tied to the interests of Russia. If it's tied to China, they might say these interests are tied to China. And they'll look at the specific tools they use, and they'll try to say this is category A, hacker group, this is category B hacker group, this is category C hacker group, and then they give them goofy names like Operation Aurora, like Operation Night Dragon, like Fuzzy Bear, all these things. And yeah, they did have one called Fuzzy Bear. They do these things. Now, what's the problem with this? The problem with it is this. Does anyone remember when Edward Snowden came out, and he has his issues, right? One of the things that was exposed with the leaks of CIA and NSA documents is that they have in their possession, in their own documents, systems of mimicking cyber attacks. In other words, they can mimic the modus operandi, the modes of operation of any cyber attack group. And other countries also have those capabilities, meaning that if you want to pin a cyber attack on this Russian hacker group, all you have to do is use A, B, and C hacker tools that they're known to use, release a statement claiming it was from them, and then people say it was from them. It's as simple as that. Does that mean they carried it out? No, it does not. The other big thing with this is another issue, which I've actually exposed in some of my own work. I exposed an organization called Babylon APT. APT means Advanced Persistent Threat. Babylon APT was a darknet marketplace run in the off time of Chinese military hackers. I had a great contact at the time who basically made his full-time job of getting into the admin level of these different darknet groups and running what he called sock puppets, right? Fake accounts that he used to gain access to them. I'm not talking about things like Silk Road or these, surface level darknet marketplaces. And I don't mean darknet like 4chan. I mean darknet like you have to use a Tor browser to access it because it exists within the actual darknet. In other words, you need a special browser to even access it in the first place. You have criminal markets operating on there. Now, Babylon APT, which later changed its name to C Market or Criminal Market, was again a marketplace being run by Chinese Communist Party hackers. But a few interesting things came out from that. Now, they were selling things like cell phone access data for like entire Latin American countries. They were selling ship tracking data of the entire Coast Guard fleet of the United States, which they could sell, for example, to drug cartels, and drug cartels would know the locations of Coast Guard ships, so they wouldn't get caught, for example. They were selling these kinds of things. They were selling SCADA system access to serious infrastructure, SCADA being software that runs the moving parts in major industrial equipment, right? They were selling 0 days to that. Basically, cyber breaches that you cannot block, that have no known defense to. They were selling things like this. Now, what this organization was doing, Babylon APT, again, a Chinese threat actor group, is they were also taking on jobs. Basically, the main marketplace was these Chinese military hackers, carrying out their 9-to-5 job for the Chinese Communist Party, hacking companies, hacking organizations, and then providing their normal stuff to the CCP. And then all the additional stuff they would steal, they were selling for their own personal profit. That's what Babylon APT was. Now, in addition to that, they were also taking on jobs. And so a lot of their clients were major governments. Go figure. A lot of governments you would not expect, as a matter of fact. We're hiring these organizations. In other words, they were working as mercenary hackers. The other thing we saw is that in addition to working as mercenary hackers, when they had too high of a, say, business backup, when they had too much business, they were hiring other hacker groups to carry out the operations. For example, in Brazil, they were hiring Brazilian hackers. They were hiring hackers in other parts of the world. Now, what happens, folks, right? What happens when you try to say it was, Fuzzy Bear or something stupid like that, who launched this attack, but in reality, it was a Russian hacker group hired by Chinese hackers who were hired by, let's say, some random Middle Eastern country to carry out the cyber attack. In other words, the individual or country interest hiring them may have been from one country. The hacker group that was given the contract may have been from another country, and the organization they hired to carry out the cyber attack was from another. That totally throws a wrench into the entire system that we use right now to identify which organizations are behind which cyber attacks. Not to mention, again, the fact that what the leaked documents of the NSA, and I believe it was NSA or CIA, I think it was NSA, showed, which again, that U.S. intelligence agencies have documents on ways of mimicking different threat actors, hacker groups from different parts of the world. They have the ability to mimic them, and other countries, yes, also have that. And so, and if you were to ask me, I'd say people say this came from Russia. I wouldn't buy it. Maybe it was, but the evidence they have to suggest it came from Russia, as far as I'm concerned, is very, very, very far from being enough. Let's put it that way. That's my take on that. Next question here is from, and one thing real quick, you can also look at who would be interested right now in basically disabling the U.S. oil market, right? Which countries could profit from ruining the U.S. oil market right now? Who would serve to benefit from it? Quite a few people. The Chinese Communist Party would definitely benefit from it, right? Yeah. Sorry, Chad, you mentioned Fancy Bear. I think that they had Fancy Bear and Fuzzy Bear. They had two different ones. That was the code names given to the Russian hacker groups by some, I think it was it CrowdStrike? It was the cybersecurity group that was accused basically of fabricating evidence in order to create that profile in the first place, which was used as a way to try to say that the cyber attacks against the DNC came from China. Came from Russia. Bunch of nonsense, right? Going into this, so let's talk about we'll go into one more part of this and we'll go to more stories. This is from DDJ Girl. He said, "Hi, Josh. What's going on with the Arizona audit? Also, the possible Michigan audit." Thanks. No new updates since Sunday that I've seen on the audit in Arizona. The audit is still ongoing. There have been attempts to try to stop it. The individuals carrying out the audit, again, 4 different organizations have been hired to carry out the audit, have clarified that the restrictions being placed on them don't actually impact anything because the security systems that they're demanding were already either in place or don't affect anything because it doesn't affect anything anyways, that it's not something they were doing in the first place. Things are going still. Things are still moving. There are many attempts to stop it. They're not stopping it, it seems. The biggest hurdle right now is that they don't have the admin passwords of the voting machines. And it turns out that the people running our elections, the states, did not actually have those systems. In other words, it's like, you buy a car and they don't give you the keys. It's kind of the way it's being framed right now, which says a lot because in the United States, basically the elections are supposed to be run by the state legislature. And if a private company or private companies were able to run the elections, that's quite different from that. We'll have to see if they're able to subpoena these companies to get these access keys. That's the other part where that's at. We'll have to see. That said, though, other places in the U.S. now are talking about holding their own audits. You mentioned Michigan. Actually, folks, moving on to the next story for the night, we have right now New Hampshire launching its own audit. And so a new audit now being added to the list, and many more may be in the works. Let's go into this actually right now. Go into it. Now, folks, Epoch Times reports this. It says Windham, North Hampshire. Windham, North Hampshire 2020 election audit starts. Let's go into it, right? New Hampshire. It says here, a 2020 election audit in a small New Hampshire town started on Tuesday. And keep in mind, this is significant. Keep in mind that Maricopa County, which is a big area, is the focus of the Arizona audit. Windham Town in New Hampshire is the focus of the New Hampshire audit. Now, a 3-person team in Windham, which is a population of roughly 15,000 people, will examine ballot counting machines and their memory cards and the hand tabulation of ballots that were used and cast in the general election of November 3rd, 2020, in the town's Rockingham County District 7 House of Representatives race. So this is the House of Representatives race in 2020 they're going to be looking into, which we've seen already some places in the U.S. that have had, not full audits, but some degree of investigation into, again, the House elections in different states. They've actually found some issues already. Let's see what happens here. The bigger thing is if they look into systems of elections that were used in other states, in other towns, in other cities, it may actually have an impact as well of encouraging other parts of the U.S. to hold similar audits. And even in Windham right now, if this goes through and they find something there, this could actually maybe even overturn a House seat. We'll have to see what happens with it. Let's go into it a bit more. Now, this is not just on the House of Representatives race. This is also the votes in the district in the gubernatorial and the U.S. Senate races, meaning that if this is overturned, maybe you'll have an extra Senate seat flipped. And right now, where you have a 50-50 divide in the Senate between Republicans and Democrats, with, again, Kamala Harris being the 51st or tie-breaking vote, this could really offset things depending on what happens from it. Not to mention the possibility that the governor there may also be overturned, depending on how this goes out. Now, it continues here, a hand recount ended with the state House candidates in the district hundreds of votes apart from the original tally. Hundreds of votes, folks. And in small areas like this, sometimes it's enough to determine an election. Now, Christy St. Laurent, a Democrat candidate, for instance, received 4,456 according to the initial results. After the recount, she had 4,357 votes, right? Now, Windham Town Council Bernard Campbell told New Hampshire Attorney General Gordon MacDonald last year that the magnitude of error was, quote, shocking to local town officials. St. Laurent requested an audit saying that the machines, important point there, that the machines may have been programmed improperly or that, quote, a significant number of ballots were double counted, which is one of the big accusations, again, of the 2020 elections. Now, officials eventually agreed to the request by New Hampshire's legislature after it passed a bill authorizing the audit. So the state legislature has passed the audit. It was signed by Governor Chris Sununu, a Republican. Have to see what happens with it, folks. But again, a lot happening on this. And folks, another big thing happening in the U.S. If you have kids who are in college, if you may be going to college yourself, if you have friends who go into college, well, folks, we've been talking for a while now about these vaccine mandates, vaccine passports. And folks, if you're going to go to college now, it seems to be the case that you're going to be forcefully vaccinated or not go to college. And folks, if you're someone or you yourself have, let's say you're a senior in college or you're a sophomore in college and you refuse to get vaccinated, well, we'll have to see what happens. Maybe they won't let you continue your education at that university. Epoch Times reports this. More than 180 college and university campuses across the United States are requiring more than 2.4 million students to produce proof of vaccination against the CCP virus if they're going to attend in-person classes this fall, regardless of whether the students have acquired immunity to the virus. Now, that's the important part here. Again, in addition to the possible legal issues of requiring a person to get vaccinated in order to attend school, right? At least in person. Maybe they can still do home learning. All right, maybe they could do study abroad or study from their computers or whatever. they're making it so that even if the person can demonstrate that they are immune to the virus, if they can demonstrate that they have, the antibodies already, they still are forced to get vaccinated. And this is a bit bizarre because this is a shift we're even seeing from the vaccine passports being done by some countries. In Israel, for example, which is kind of, leading the charge on this whole vaccine passport policy, outside of mainland China, they make it so that if you have to be vaccinated if you want to enter the country in a lot of ways, or if you want to access certain facilities there, like going to the gym and so on, you have to be vaccinated, and they have vaccine passports there. They make an exception if you can demonstrate that you have antibodies. In other words, you've already gotten the virus, you can demonstrate you have antibodies. That is no longer being accepted by some institutions in the US, including by these universities and colleges, where even if you can show that you are immune to the virus but have not yet been vaccinated, they are still going to forcefully vaccinate you if you're going to attend their campus, if you're going to join their school on campus. All right, folks, that said, it's getting a bit late, so we'll call it a night here. A lot going on right now, especially these audits, especially with the different states pushing back against what the federal government is doing, especially with the way that states are kind of joining together on new legislative push to address things that they see either they disagree with being done by the federal government or that they believe should be done by the federal government. Like, for example, this ban on, or say, harsher laws when it comes to rioting. Now, folks, a lot going on right now. I'll be keeping you all updated on this. In the meantime, again, if you want to support Crossroads, we're totally demonetized on YouTube. Please, again, check out epochtv.com. That's EPOCH TV.com. And if you want to specifically support Crossroads on there, put a /Crossroads. EpochTimesTV.com. EpochTV.com/Crossroads. Show them who sent you, and really appreciate you for your support, folks. Again, this is an uncensored platform. This is the future of Crossroads. This is the future of video news, as far as we see it. A lot we're trying to get done, a lot in the process right now. We'll keep you all updated on it. And folks, that said, as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.